It's great to have you here, and hopefully, um, people can access the chat. So please say hi, pop your just hello in the chat so we know that you're there. It was absolutely fabulous, and we'll get started with our session. So we're having this event to celebrate Biology Week, which is part of the Royal Society of Biology, and the purpose is in celebration of biology. The theme this year is Biology for a Better Tomorrow. And I've contacted my fellow biology tutors within my network to join me today, and we can have this discussion. And so just please introduce yourselves one at a time, whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, I can. So my name's Georgina. I'm a STEM tutor with Green Tutors. But biology is my favourite subject. I can say this here. You won't come young. It's the best science.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree. Brilliant. Thank you. Sophia, do you want to pop in?
Hi, yes, I'm Sophia from Pineapple Tuition, and I'm a biologist. So I've taught A-level and GCSE biology for the last 17 years, and now I do it as a tutor, which is amazing. I'm loving it.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Helen?
Hi everyone, yes, I'm Helen. I run Helen Reid Science Tuition. I'm a qualified science teacher, but my specialism is biology. I've taught in secondary education for over 18 years. And yeah, I'm now also providing small group and one-to-one tuition for GCSE sciences and A-level biology.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I forgot to mention, I'm Nicola Kelting from MK Tutoring. And you can see all our logos and things on there, which is super. But the key thing for this is that we come together as biologists to have a discussion about some themes around biology for a better tomorrow. And the key purpose, as I mentioned, is in celebration of Biology Week. I've been a member of the Royal Society for Biology for a number of years now, and I've run various different outreach events and quizzes with students and sort of Saturday activities at primary schools, again, all in celebration of biology on different themes. And this year, I thought it would be really lovely to come together with my sort of biology colleagues within the tuition industry, and we collectively had a chat with our students, and from our experience of going over various topics within the GCSE science specifications and specifically within the A-level biology specifications around the theme of biology for a better tomorrow. And so we've brought in quite a few things where we've seen commonalities of queries and questions from students that people aren't sure where they've heard it from, if it's a myth or whether it's something that must be true. And so we'll delve into the science and have a little bit of linking across. But these are some great things that our students have either given us as questions or suggestions. Yes, the main thing we're going to try and do is relate to the biology spec and the GCSE science specification. So at any point, if anyone has any questions, we'd love to see them in the chat. We will try our best to answer those questions, and we can always do so afterwards and towards the end as well. We want to generate thought and we want to generate discussion, not just in this event now, but follow on from that. So any queries or questions, we'll hopefully try and follow those up as well. The key thing as well as biologists, the linking of ideas and the linking across the sciences is super, super important. We'd love to encourage wider reading, wider understanding of various concepts. And in doing so, we'd like to really emphasize the use of trusted material, the sources where you get information. And so from these myths that we're hopefully busting today with you, we will be providing references, links, where we've sourced some information, and also where you can find some wider information and reading as well. So we can provide that for you. You can take images of the slides if you wish. So we're going to kick off with antibiotics. So my first thing for you guys is please pop something in the chat, either myth or must be true. Think about how that's phrased. Antibiotics can treat all infections?
Okay, so we've got this statement here: antibiotics can treat all infections. So the first thing I wanted to just give you a little précis about was all the antis that we come across in biology. So we've got antibiotics, we've got antigens, we've got antibodies. And these are the things that are quite commonly confused. So as we know, hopefully, your antibiotics are the treatments that we use to treat bacterial infections. And then we've got antigens. And so your antigens are these proteins that are found on the surface of cells that are like bacteria, viruses, and fungi. And it's the antigens that your body is responding to, your immune system would respond to it. And then you've got your antibodies. And the antibodies are what your body produces in response to antigens, okay, to stop you getting infections, to get rid of the pathogens that are in your body. So with antibiotics treating all infections, we should hopefully already know that we can only treat bacterial infections with antibiotics. And that is because the antibiotics start to break down the cell membrane and the cell walls, rather, of the bacterial cells.
Super. So I wonder if people from that explanation can still in their mind's eye think, is the statement we can see on the screen, is that a myth or must it be true from that point? So Georgina and Helen, would you like to drop in to either of that to add to it at all?
Yeah, can I just drop in there? So just following on from what Sophia said about how it is a bit of a myth that they will kill, destroy all infections. Knowing a little bit more about how antibiotics work, as Sophia says, they target bacterial things, so bacterial cell membranes or bacterial cell walls. And I think it would probably help students if they realise that the way antibiotics are developed are to target something very specific within a bacterium. So, for example, they may inhibit a specific bacterial enzyme. So therefore, it will only work against that bacterium, not, another virus, let's say. So I think it's just that knowledge that antibiotics are designed in a way. I mean, some are very specific, some are a little bit more general, but it's that, when they're developed, they're designed to target something very specific within a bacterium. So it's not just something that will kill all pathogens.
Yeah,
also, it's quite difficult. Sorry, Nicola. I was going to say it's quite difficult when, say, you go to the hospital, you go to the doctor, and you've got some kind of a hopefully bacterial infection as opposed to a viral one, and the doctor is not necessarily going to be able to say, well, it's this particular bacterium that's causing the infection. And this is where we can start thinking about the overuse of antibiotics, where the doctor might give you a range. And I think we've probably all been there where something's happened, you've got some kind of infection, and then you end up with like 2 or 3 or 4 bottles of these antibiotics, or sometimes, if you're unfortunate, to be having them on a drip being fed into your body, just to make sure that a range of bacteria that it could possibly be causing your infection, hopefully somewhere within those antibiotics there will be one at least that will help to start destroying those bacteria that are in your body. So and then we start thinking about, well, actually, let's talk about superbugs and what do we mean by a superbug, and where does this antibiotic resistance idea come from?
Absolutely. And I think going back to the basics of your baseline at GCSE when we think about pathogens is so students have it clear in their head that bacteria is only one type of pathogen, and also the definition that a pathogen will cause an infectious disease, not all bacteria or pathogens. So it's about grouping, it's about getting your terminology in the right places is really helpful. And sometimes you find with A-level students, if they haven't got that terminology or it's a little bit rusty, it really causes some confusion later on. So going back to those key definitions, and that's the same in any topic really, can really help deepen the understanding on that side of things. So as you were saying, Sophia, about the different antibiotics, we've got our broad spectrum, we've got our narrow spectrum, but understanding what those things mean. Super. So are we ready to see if this is a myth or a must be true? Or would anyone else like to add in?
Can I just add something in there, Nicola?
Of course.
I was just going to say that where we've talked about broad spectrum and narrow spectrum antibiotics, I think also to add, if you are an A-level student and you're aiming for those really top grades, particularly with the AQA specification where you've got to write this essay at the end of your paper 3, you want to be familiar with and have some examples of actual names of bacterium or bacteria, I should say, the plural, so that you can use those within the essay, obviously, if it's relevant. So things like MRSA, things like C. difficile, do make sure that those are included so that you can start showing your really a deeper understanding of what's going on. And the other thing I just wanted to mention, just before we reveal, because it's going to be a big giveaway, is that in my references that that you'll be able to access afterwards, one of those articles is an article from the World Health Organization, and it talks about how antibiotics and vaccines are linked. And so those two ideas linking together, again, if you're an A-level student and you're mentioning things like that in your 25-mark essay, smashing. How good is that to show that you can show these two big ideas in biology and linking vaccines and antibiotics together? So
Absolutely.
just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that. And again, that kind of adds into one of our sort of key ideas for this session, is that wider reading, that linking of information and ideas and understanding, and making sure that you're using information from trusted sources. So superb. So shall we go for the reveal? I'm hoping everybody will have got this one by now.
Drum roll, please.
Drum roll. I should have got one. Yeah, next time I'll get a little set of drums. Okay, so click the wrong button. Here we go. It is a myth. Yeah, it's a very generalized statement. So I'm hoping a lot of people in the audience would have got that. And it's not a case of all infections, because all infections can be from lots of different types of pathogens. So we've got our viruses, we've got our fungal infections, and we've got protists in addition to bacterial infections, and a whole host of different types of bacterial infections as well. So fantastic, and thank you for contributions that we will have a look at later. So this is our yes to this. So in the audience, you can read this, and we'll make this available as well. But while this is up on the screen, any comments from the panel at this point from this information related to GCSE or A-level?
I just mentioned quickly about something we discussed earlier, really common thing amongst students is saying that bacteria become immune to antibiotics. So we can't move on without just mentioning that. So we have to say bacteria become resistant to antibiotics. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So just want to say that.
Important.
Yeah.
And on this. Sorry, we'll get it eventually with not interrupting each other. So this top idea here then, antibiotics can slow down or stop the growth of bacteria. And so obviously we use antibiotics to treat bacterial infections. We've mentioned that already. Common examples of antibiotics that you will hopefully have come across are penicillin or amoxicillin. You can obviously be allergic to penicillin, which is probably where people have heard this before as well. And those in year 12 or 13 or about to be year 12 or 13 is this bottom statement becomes really, really relevant to you, because at A-level, you, as well as talking about antibiotics in the more general form, we actually start dividing them into classes. So we can talk about actually in terms of antibiotics and how they work, they can block or inhibit the synthesis of bacterial cell walls. They can block or inhibit the protein synthesis itself in bacterial cells. They can inhibit nucleic acid synthesis or the synthesis of this folic acid. So we've got quite a big group of antibiotics in terms of looking at how they function in themselves. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, that's definitely your step up to A-level. And Georgina, is there something you'd like to add in?
Yeah, just looking at this slide kind of highlights why there are so many side effects from having antibiotic treatments. One, because we have quite a lot of significant bacteria in our own digestive system and skin and things that do very important things for us, but the targets aren't a world away from our own body function, so it is no wonder that taking antibiotics has such side effects, and exactly for the reasons that you explained, a little bit of knowledge can help you use them more sensibly.
Absolutely. And that actually brings me on to thinking about cells and eukaryotic cells, prokaryotic cells, because often questions can be, well, why doesn't that affect other cells in the body? Why is it just targeting bacterial cells? And the key thing is that those protein synthesis are specific within a prokaryotic cell, for example, or molecules that they're particularly targeting in a membrane would be specific to prokaryotic rather than our body's eukaryotic. So that's something I think as well at A level that can differentiate and discriminate in terms of grades that students need to be aware of. Super. So yes to this. Excellent. All right. Are we all happy to move on to our next one? Brilliant.
Yeah,
stuff.
let's do it.
So there's been some fab things coming up from our students, and so, reference materials. So these will be made available to those who would like slides, and you can have a look at those towards the end as well. But information that we've referred to, you can have a look at here. Our next one is related to waste management. So various areas across GCSE science, and it does fit into the A-level biology specification as well. So have a good think about this. Those of you who are live, we will be having a good look. So I would really appreciate if you could put a myth or must be true. What do you think about that phrase? And would anybody like to sort of jump in on this one first?
Yeah, so plastic recycling or plastic waste seems to get quite a lot of attention in media and in messages about being kinder to our ecosystems, and like fairly so, because it is a significant problem and it's something that we can all take some action to reduce in our day-to-day life. But it's a small part of a bigger picture, so it's certainly worth having an awareness of why that plastic is a problem, how it's a problem, and what things we'd need to consider. So ultimately, I think it's we're pretty well aware that a large amount of what we use, produce and dispose of is plastic, and that plastic's going to take quite a long time to decompose and turn back into anything that might exist in nature by itself. So a lot of the time I think people are, I mean, it's a part of our UK council system that plastic gets recycled, but that it in itself isn't really enough to solve the problem. So the whole 5R system that's probably been shared before, hopefully you've seen the idea of it starts with refuse, then reduce, reuse, repurpose, and then recycle right at the end of that chain. So even if you're recycling containers and things, if you can actually repurpose them instead of disposing of them, that's much, much more beneficial to your ecosystem and environmental impact on as a whole than that plastic being cleaned, probably sterilized, melted and turned into something else, when in reality it is probably going to end up in waste. Reusing things and reducing the use of plastic in the first place is much more impactful than any of those things. And if we have the option to not use plastic items in the first place, then not only are we not going to end up with this plastic waste, but we're not going to be using crude oil to make that plastic in the first place. Absolutely. So this is a significant part of the spec.
Yeah, I think that's really brilliant that you brought into the crude oil. I think there's a disconnect sometimes with students that they forget where actually plastic comes from originally. And obviously there's all the energy and the effort to get the crude oil out of the ground. Yes, they learn in chemistry about fractional distillation, but sometimes then they forget what these main products are because they're concerned with thinking about the bitumen at the bottom and the gases at the top, and it's the bits in between. So that's really powerful. But also I think a lot of the time the students are really aware of the 3 R's. Just remind us, could you, Georgina, of the other 2 to make up the 5?
Yeah, so it starts with refuse and reduce. So I think that reuse, repurpose, recycle is what we do with stuff that's already made. But if we refuse plastic packaging and plastic items and then reduce the amount that we use them, then that's the part that's going to have more of an impact on the crude oil that gets turned into plastic in the first place.
Yeah, fantastic. Helen, have you got any observations to add in from working with your students on this area?
Yeah, certainly. I can relate to the whole thing about crude oil and polymers, and not sort of thinking about polymers as plastics, although there is a little bit, isn't there, in the spec about polythene. But yeah, I think there's a few other misconceptions as well, that we just have like a plastic container, we recycle and it comes back as a plastic container, and the idea that there's a degradation in quality every time the plastic is recycled. So there's that to consider. And there's a term that I've heard recently called corporate greenwashing, where corporations are basically shifting all the responsibility onto consumers to recycle, and that kind of gives them the sort of free license to just continue to produce plastic packaging. So I think it's good for students to know that, you know, recycling isn't just this kind of perfect kind of circle, as sometimes we're led to believe.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you for that, because we're still very much in a very fossil fuel system, aren't we, in terms of our infrastructure with vehicles, and it all stems back to getting that crude oil out the ground. And there's a view of it's an easy thing to do. Well, just put it in the recycling, that's fine, and then I'm actually just bypassing my responsibility as an individual to do something. We can all actually stop and have a think. Did I need to buy that in that plastic in the first place? Was there, or is there an alternative, or could I look further to find an alternative? Brilliant.
I think
you.
I was just going to add, Nicola, it was interesting, as Georgina and Helen were speaking, I was just thinking about back in the day. Do you remember when we had bottles of water, like a disposable bottle of water, and then on the bottom, where apparently I don't know if it's true or not, you've got a triangle on the bottom, which means that you shouldn't be refilling them because there's chemicals from the plastic that's going to leach into the water, so you're not supposed to refill them. And how we've now moved on to, in society, having so many more things that are reusable, generally speaking, in terms of like cosmetics and things like stuff that would normally be thrown away. But also like the water bottles. Now we have every student going into school with their own refillable BPA free water bottle, and so that shift is definitely a positive in terms of the environment and the fact that we're hopefully using less plastic. So it's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. So are we ready to see if this is a myth or must be true? I think we know what the answer is, but we'll give this one a whirl. Yeah, so it's not just about recycling. There's a lot else that can be done. So yes, as a statement, that is a myth. There is a lot more that can be done, and it's about thinking about if you can refuse, if you can repurpose, reuse prior to any recycling happening. So absolutely brilliant. And I think as citizens, we have that responsibility, and it does come into PHSE, it does come into geography, comes into lots of areas. There's various bits of life cycle assessment in chemistry, so it's not just the sort of ecology side and biodiversity. There's huge areas within agriculture, so huge amounts of linking that can be done there. Fantastic. Thank you for that. So next one we have, I keep forgetting the reference list, but there we are. We've got that there. So they can be referred to. So our next one is vaccines. We've got a short and sweet statement here. So have a good think about this, please. Vaccines cause more harm than good. Very topical considering we're out of COVID, but it's still fairly fresh. I've got friends and family who have been ill from COVID quite recently, friends who are testing, friends who aren't testing, they've got flu, you know, there are no restrictions now. So from this statement, myth or must be true, if people would like to pop their thoughts in the chat, that will be fantastic. And then we'll open the floor to our panel.
Okay.
Who'd like to kick us off?
Yeah,
sorry, Helen, was that you?
That's okay. Yeah, I was just thinking about how all the topics this evening are kind of all linked to kind of like global citizenship and global responsibility, you know, all the things we've talked about already. And yeah, my mum is currently recovering from COVID. She was about to have a COVID booster next week, but she's got COVID. So yeah, just thinking about vaccines, it is a really topical issue, quite a controversial issue at times. But it does appear on most, if not all, of the GCSE and A-level specifications. So it is really important for our young people and students. And we were discussing that as tutors, we found students often have lots of misconceptions about how a vaccine works, and about the arguments for and against the use of vaccination. And I think that is often linked to actually a lack of understanding of how the immune system works. Because I think if we fully understand the way immunity works, then it kind of makes perfect sense how a vaccine would work. So I think all of that, it's very confusing at GCSE and A-level. It then doesn't help the general public to make fully informed and educated decisions around vaccines. So as you were saying, there's a really current context to all of this. According to the UK government, coverage of all vaccines is down below WHO recommended 95% levels. There's been increases of cases of measles in West Midlands and London. So yeah, it is a really, really current and topical issue, but it isn't a modern thing. I think people need to kind of have a little look at history sometimes. And for centuries, humans have always strived to try and find a way of preventing disease and protecting ourselves. And there's even some sources that suggest in 200 BC, humans were trying to deliberately expose people to certain diseases in order to then develop an immunity.
Wow.
which I thought was fascinating. And then obviously 1800s we had Edward Jenner, Louis Pasteur, that made some like major leaps in vaccination. But then I think in more recent times we've had when we've had an absence of these disease threats sometimes, then the concerns about the risks become more dominated in the debate. And that led to many myths around vaccination. And we've had lots of comments from students in the run up to this event about myths that they have heard about or things they weren't sure were myths. So some of which things like vaccination causes autism. And that was all linked to a bogus article in The Lancet in 1998.
Yes, I remember that. There was quite a lot going on. And it's been used, hasn't it, in exam questions and things over the past few years, looking at picking it apart, and didn't have some crazy small sample size of like 8 or something.
Well, less than 12. So yeah, I think it's maybe 8. So feel free, anyone else jump in with any other myths and misconceptions that you've heard about. But I think that's one of the big ones that I got back when I said, what have you heard about vaccines? What do you think are the the risks or the myths around it?
Fantastic.
I love that you shared those examples that you shared. Really highlight what Nicola said right at the beginning. Make sure the source of your information is valid and that you understand what information you're being given, because I've heard so many things about vaccines alongside the idea of vaccines causing autism because less than 12 people showed some correlate. That's not correlation. And the information about vaccines being made from dead babies when in reality it's like things from stem cell research, like a little bit of more information, a little bit more research and understanding what's actually being shared with you, things make so much more sense, and that it can be so harmful to have the wrong information.
Yeah, and there's dramatization, isn't there? There's taking things out of context, and there's turning, as you've just given a prime example of stem cells suddenly into dead babies. I mean, it's a huge leap. Sophia, have you sort of had examples from your students in this sort of area?
That is the biggest one, actually. While Helen was talking, I was thinking about the fact that it was the MMR vaccine. And I think as a parent, the thought that was just in my mind was that it can be scary when you don't have all the information, you don't understand the biology behind, the science behind what's going on, to be thinking that I'm vaccinating my child against 3 different illnesses all at the same time. Particularly the MMR, that the routine vaccine program is, kids are really young when they get their first jabs. And so there's that level of, yes, I want to protect my child, but also it's really important as on a population level to try and have that immunity in place, because as I think Helen was saying about this increased prevalence of measles now, that should not be the case, that we have measles popping up back in society when we've tried so hard over the years to eradicate illnesses. And the reason we're doing it is because it's these diseases are so harmful. Otherwise we wouldn't be investing the time, the money, the research into PhDs and things like that to try and develop the vaccines in the first place.
Absolutely.
And misinformation's got a lot to answer for.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's interesting as well, from what Helen was saying earlier, from the research we found that people have been introducing themselves to actually catch the disease, maybe when somebody's not as ill. So we hope, what we know now is if it's viral, perhaps it's the viral load is low, so you might catch it at a lower level, you won't be as ill. But it's like chickenpox parties. Did you ever go to one as a child?
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I remember taking my children when they were younger to chickenpox party. Have it now so you don't get it when you're at school, or get it when you're older, because the actual effects on your body are harder. And as an adult, having shingles is far worse than having chickenpox as a child. I remember having it and being covered in calamine lotion, but I don't have any horrendous memories. I just have lots of memories of calamine lotion and cotton wool. So, you know, it's these different things that we can look at. Fantastic.
And this pulls in nicely. Sorry, Nicola, I've done it again. This pulls in nicely to this idea at A level of antigenic variability, and this term that comes up when you read it in the book, and it can throw you because it's such a big word. But the fact that, like the flu vaccine, we need to give the flu vaccine every year, that's again a GCSE idea. But because the antigens on the surface of these pathogens that we're talking about change every year, in the case of flu, this is why we need to constantly be putting money into research to create new vaccines all the time. And this is why this is such a massive body of research that's happening constantly all the time. Again, COVID vaccination is another classic example, isn't it? Yeah. Where we've had to have different strains of the COVID virus that's needed to be vaccinated against.
Yeah, and it's mutating. And again, you think about A-level, as an A-level student, you need to understand exactly what mutation means. That happens spontaneously. It's not something that gets developed in a lab or anything like to that effect. Again, there is all the misinformation around COVID in those areas. And obviously, we tend to follow the Australian flu, don't we? Because their winter is kind of before ours. Yeah. And we look ahead, and we're looking at global cycles, aren't we, as well? And more work's been done recently with regards to malaria and potentially a malaria vaccine. There's a huge body of work now, and it's so problematic with it being a protist, a different type of organism to which the vaccines are developed. And again, it's all to do with a wide variability of antigens, but huge amounts of money has been going into malaria vaccines, and we're getting closer and closer, which is amazing, because such large areas of developing countries and tropical, subtropical parts of the world are sadly hit with malaria. And you don't want it, because I've had it, but luckily I had the right species, so I was okay. But that's just, it's not fun. Brilliant. So anything else would anyone like to add for our vaccines before we bust the myth?
I was just going to say just two things. One was, I was thinking how, especially in A-level, there's a lot of evaluation questions, and this lends itself really nicely to, sometimes students just want to say, yes, it's good, or no, it's bad. But actually, sometimes you can say both. And in fact, you need to, for many of the questions, be able to say 3 arguments for, 3 against. So that's something that comes up actually at GCSE as well.
It does.
And just a stat that is in one of my references, but where one of the myths is that natural immunity is much better than vaccine acquired immunity. But apparently, if you contracted measles, you'd have a 1 in 500 chance of death from your symptoms. Ooh. Whereas if you had the chance of having a severe allergic reaction from the MMR vaccine is less than 1 in a million. So, yeah.
Big difference there. Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you for that. And I was going to say something about A-level, and it's just escaped my brain, but it might come back. It was to do with, you mentioned evaluate questions and the application questions with all the data at A-level.
Data questions, yeah.
This is an area sometimes when students are answering those questions, they're not using enough context from the question. They're not taking out the information and then actually turning it into their answer. A few pitfalls I find that students fall down into is just basically repeating what's in the question as well. So it's not really going to get them any credit. And they find that frustrating. They feel they've answered the question. So yeah, you're looking for different sides of the argument, aren't you? But actually utilizing that information is the important part to answer those application questions. The
command words are a bit of a clue, though. I've been talking about that a lot recently. If it says state, then you are repeating information. If it says suggest and explain, then you're having to think outside the box. But it says justify, that's where you need two sides of the argument. So they do give you clues.
They do. But I think they do tend to, and still, I'm like a parrot sometimes. Is that the right word? Anyway, repeating myself about describe and explain, because they get switched at GCSE and at A level quite frequently. And I think sometimes it's human nature that students want to rush to get the information down on a piece of paper, and they're not thinking about actually answering the question specifically. And again, that's exam technique and it's experience, but it's also attention to detail, isn't it? We can all get better at that by focusing on it a little bit more. Wonderful. So we are busting a myth, and this is a myth in terms of its phrase itself, and moving over to yes to this, most definitely. The global data is very consistent in the evidence of vaccines being hugely effective. So would anyone on the panel like to comment about this statement at all? Are we all good? I think we've covered quite a bit of ground on vaccines. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for everybody's contributions. And we're coming to the vaccine references there, so they can get referred to, which is super. Lots of background reading there for everybody, or bedtime reading, depends on which you choose. And then we're coming on to this statement here relating to sustainability and palm oil. So quite a few students, because they've heard of palm oil, it's talked about quite a lot through primary school and secondary school. We have keystone species such as the orangutan in tropical Southeast Asian forests, where most of palm oil plantations are. There are in other parts of the world as well. I'm thinking, well, it's a plant, it photosynthesizes, it's not going to contribute to climate change. But there's lots of different things going on here. So myth or must be true? Have a good read of that statement. And these are words from students. I've tried to be as specific as possible. And it's interesting to take that take on it. So must be fine. It's a plant, it photosynthesizes, and therefore it's taking in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. That's a good thing. So opening that out to the floor, what is anybody's initial first thoughts on this?
I want to base my decision on how much I love Nutella, but
I was about to say Nutella. That's all I can think about right now.
Oh no!
You're gonna break my heart.
We need to campaign them then, don't we?
Yeah.
It isn't just, we've got to remember it's in cosmetics as well. I think everyone does think of Nutella. It's in cleaning products. If you look on labels and things, hopefully, it'll say the sustainable source. But yeah, it is in so many different products. It is hard to avoid, but yeah, I think there are quite a few myths and misconceptions around it, aren't there? That palm oil just is bad.
Yes.
But actually, it's all about if you can source it sustainably, if it's from a sustainable palm oil plantation, it's fine. It's good. In fact, some other sources of oil would be probably more damaging and take up a lot more land than palm oil does. So it's thinking about those
incredibly efficient plants when you look at it botanically, how much it can produce in terms of its fruit, how much oil, the yield is amazing. And it's one of the top plants that we use. It's basically on an industrial scale, and it goes into so many other areas of food and agriculture, and as you say, cosmetics. But it's how we've been doing it, and it's similar to how we have been running the world basically on a fossil fuel industry. The mentality has been very similar with palm oil. Chopping down virgin rainforests in huge swathes across Southeast Asian countries, predominantly, not only two. I've driven through Malaysia and parts of it for hours. You're just driving through a monoculture of palm oil for absolutely hours and hours and hours. But it's getting better. The industry is getting better, and you can, as a consumer, you can air your voice with where you spend your money and how you'll spend your money and which products you will buy. So margarine, for example, loads of different brands, aren't there? But you can have a look on the back and they will specifically say whether it's sustainable palm oil or not. That is included within that product. And I think cosmetics are getting better at putting in their ingredients in terms of the sustainability as well. But the interesting point, and I think a lot of students do this as well, they think plant, it's green, it's got chloroplasts, it photosynthesizes, but all living cells respire. And that is, again, a phrase I say a lot to a lot of students. Let's not forget about respiration. And at GCSE, we know we've got our word equations, which are the opposite. And then students have a shock when they get to A level and learn there's a lot more detail in those equations when we look at photosynthesis and respiration at A level. But when palm oil plantations are planted, then huge swathes of land from that original vegetation are actually destroyed. So you've got deforestation. Even if it was agricultural land that was then planted with palm oil, you've got other land that's cleared because that agricultural land is still needed for food, for cattle, for whatever domestic agricultural practice that was happening. So you've got all these other knock-on effects. But there's one biggie that I find students forget about. Can any of you guys jump in? I know I'm asking you to read my mind now, which is a bad thing, and but what's kind of missing from that list other than the deforestation?
What about the animals that were living in there?
Yeah. We've also got the biodiversity and the huge variety of plants and animal species and fungal species, all kinds of species that we actually haven't recorded for science yet. That has a big impact. We are reducing those numbers. Some species are going extinct, but in doing so as well, we are reducing the capability of carbon being locked from the atmosphere into biomass, because plants of different species do that at different rates. And by planting a monoculture as a plantation, you're only planting one type of plant. So that's one of the key things. And the other area in a lot of tropical biomes is we have peat areas of swampland perhaps, but peat areas. And when those areas are cleared, huge swathes of greenhouse gases will go into the atmosphere. So there's a lot of linking across chemistry here, and also delves into geography, and thinking about what are greenhouse gases, what is the greenhouse effect, how does that contribute to global warming, how do these both contribute to climate change? So I don't know about you guys, but I find some students just lump all of that together in one go. Have you experienced that?
Yeah, you just said quite a lot of different key words that
Yes.
they just said sustainability. They've missed out all of the key words they could have got marks for. I really think it's important to share as well that a lot of what you've described relating to the concerns with palm oil relate to concerns with farming in general. So it's not just, we can't just say these things that happen in tropical countries, how terrible.
Very true.
We do it here.
Yes, very much so. Yeah. Sort of using palm oil as an example. Excellent stuff. So we're talking about the carbon cycle at the end of the day, aren't we? When we're looking at it in that instance, when we're thinking about respiration and photosynthesis. And it's coming back again to students being clear on definitions, thinking about greenhouse gases. Our classics for GCSE science are carbon dioxide and methane. You've got other examples in Brazilian rainforests of cattle and clearing forests and growing soy. So you've got a similar thing to do with the carbon cycle that you could look at here. But if we come back to our palm oil, by planting specifically unsustainable palm oil, using techniques that are unsustainable, not leaving in this country, I think most people are familiar with set aside areas of land in agriculture. So it's either left for wildflowers or it's left in areas of rewilding. There's similar schemes within areas of where there is palm oil. And lots of biodiversity surveys have been done and data collected to show that the areas are not just a clear monoculture, that other species will actually grow and flourish within and around those plantations, especially where the rivers are running through the riverine areas, and leaving a big strip of forest either side of the river is good for the hydrological cycle, and it's great as well for the biodiversity there, and linking some corridors between areas. So we don't want to necessarily demonize palm oil. I think the key thing here is it's here. Huge areas of land are covered in palm oil. It's just putting pressure on those companies to actually make sure that that palm oil is as sustainable as possible. So shall we bust that myth? Yeah,
let's do it.
So, yes, palm oil as a plant does photosynthesize and lock in carbon dioxide, but actually the whole process of the plantation, it's a myth on that side of things. The whole process actually releases more carbon into the atmosphere. We've got deforestation, loss and draining of the peat swamps, total disruption of ecosystems, and within that there are industrial processes, so there's emissions from that, and various different land use as well, so land being used more and more. So it's a yes to hopefully sustainable palm oil. Fantastic. Anybody on the panel want to jump in with any of that before we go any further?
I was going to ask a question about what makes sustainable palm oil sustainable, but I think you've answered it, Nicola.
Okay. Yeah.
As you spoke. Yeah, it's interesting.
All
You've
right,
answered it before I asked it. Cool.
Yes, and there are more references here. There is an organisation called the Round Table of Sustainable Palm Oil. Huge amounts of information there. They collectively basically are best practice, and lots of organisations will buy in and follow protocols, surveys being done, the kind of set aside style of growing palm oil. Also making pledges not to cut down any more virgin forest, making, you know, various other commitments. Other organisations that are really hot on palm oil, Chester Zoo and the Zoological Society of London. So they've both got fantastic references for students to have a good look at. And there's an interesting article down here in The Biologist, which is the publication from the Royal Society of Biology, more to do with thinking about biodiversity as a whole, and thinking about what we can do and be more aware in terms of conserving biodiversity and how we can be all more sustainable in the way that we live. So, and that brings me on to The Biologist, which is a great publication of the Royal Society of Biology. As I said, I've been a member for a number of years, and I still quite like a print copy. I like to sit down with a coffee and read a magazine. And I keep them though, and I refer back to them, and my kids will pick them up occasionally, which is really great. So I leave them lying around, so they've got their wider reading. But as a member, you can have access to back copies. There is a brilliant catalogue when you log in with your membership. And as a student, there is a fantastic student membership called BioNet, which is a membership for 14 to 19-year-olds. It's only £10 a year. So it's an absolute bargain. So especially those A-level students looking for that wider reading, this is an example of a publication that could really help you with that. There are obviously other publications out there, but this is a fab one that I would recommend. And also to biologists, you can get professional membership as well. So that's really worth looking into if you're interested further. So that's the BioNet. It can be found on the Royal Society of Biology's website, and also memberships. It's got a various different range of memberships if people want to get involved in further. Loads of member benefits as well. Again, you can find on there. And at this point, it just leaves me to say thank you so much to the panel. I've thoroughly enjoyed working with you guys, Sophia, Georgina and Helen, sort of planning this together, having a really great chat about what our students have kind of collectively been saying, finding some commonalities there. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It's been amazing. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Great stuff. I've enjoyed it too. And hopefully we'll get some follow-ups from this. So those people who are watching on follow-up or who are now live, feel free to photograph. You've got those QR codes. You can find out a little bit further about ourselves. There's a freebie there if you want to have a scan of a GCSE biology revision guide. So I would go for that, definitely. And we look forward to seeing what's in the chat. Our contact details are available. And those people who registered with their emails, we will be dropping you an email as well to follow up. So any bits people want to pop in the chat, please do so now. And from the panel, does anybody else have anything they would like to add in before we say cheerio?
Just want to say thank you very much and good luck to all the students that are doing their mock exams coming up in the next couple of weeks. Get plenty of revision done over half term, and you know who to contact if you need further support with your biology. You've got four experts here in front of you. So I think it's really amazing that we all got together. I love this collaboration. So thank you. And thank you to the Royal Society of Biology as well.
Yeah, that's super. I echo all of that, and it's nice to get involved to celebrate biology week. Super duper. All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Louise.
Thank
Brilliant.
you. Bye.